and the United Kingdom. This would be the first deal that he has actually locked in since starting his trade war. And details of this deal, though, set to be revealed in a 10 a.m. press conference in the Oval Office. Now, the UK, like every other country, is right now subject to a 10% baseline tariff from the United States and a 25% tariff on steel, aluminum, and on autos. CNN's Elena Treen joining us from the White House with much more on this. So, it's more of what we don't know, I guess, this morning ahead of this announcement. But tell us what we got.
Right. Well, as you said, we got our first trade deal, Kate. We are going to learn more about it at 10 a.m. when the president gathers in the Oval Office with some United Kingdom officials for this, as the president is touting it, major trade agreement. Now, of course, this is welcome news to global markets, but even more welcome news to the White House and this Trump administration, which has really been facing increased pressure to announce any sort of progress and movement on these different trade negotiations, particularly as we continue to, see the economic turmoil from the president's tariff policies. Now, this trade agreement comes almost a month to the day that the president was forced to roll back his reciprocal tariffs because it had sent different markets spiraling. And so this should ease some of that. Now, I do want to read for you because we've really seen the president. He is posting up a storm this morning, Kate. I want to read for you one of his latest posts on this. He said, quote, "The agreement with the United Kingdom is a full and comprehensive one that will cement the relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom for many years to come. Because of our longtime history and allegiance together, it is a great honor to have the United Kingdom as our first announcement." He says many other deals, which are in serious stages of negotiations, will be to follow. Now, just to be clear here, despite his rhetoric and the administration's rhetoric that this is going to be a full and comprehensive deal, we know that trade agreements, real trade agreements, actually take a lot of time. They are complex negotiations. They go over the minutia of different, tariff goods, non-tariff barriers, etc. And so what we're likely to see today at 10 a.m. is some sort of memorandum of understanding. They'll probably lower some tariffs in the time being, but it'll take longer likely to really hash out the very specific details. Now, as you mentioned, we don't actually know a lot of what is going into this agreement, but the Financial Times actually had a great story earlier this week laying out some of the parameters. They say that Trump is lining up tax breaks for tech giants, cheaper access to UK car and agriculture markets for American exports, and in return, the president is expected to lower steel and automobile tariffs. And so that's likely some of what we're going to see at 10 a.m. when they announce this agreement, Kate.
All right. Well,
oh, lordy, he's on a renaming rampage from golfs to gaffs. Fueled by lemonade today. Troops, can you believe it? Should we delve into the latest episode of The Art of the Rename? President Trump, in his infinite wisdom, has decided that the real threat to America isn't inflation or climate change, it's geographical nomenclature. Yes, you heard that right. The man who once tried to buy Greenland, he wants to invade it now, is attempting to rebrand the world's map one body of water at a time.
I don't hurt anybody's feelings. I don't know if feelings are going to be hurt. Why have a case right over here? It's called Gulf of America. And I guess a lot of people get ideas from us. But the Gulf of America was something I thought should have been named a long time ago.
As you know, I have been across the Gulf that you call Persian and they call Arabian.
Why do you call it Gulf? You have been to school, or haven't you?
Yes.
What was the name that you have read during your school days?
Persian Gulf.
All right.
First, he set his sights on the Gulf of Mexico, declaring it the Gulf of America. Sorry about the impression. He sounds constipated. Nothing says, really, patriotism like renaming a body of water that doesn't even belong entirely to the United States of America. Not content with that, he's now aiming to rename the Persian Gulf as the Arabian Gulf. A move that's, well, let's face it, it's sure to win him friends in Iran. Oh, wait, it hasn't. In fact, it's actually united Iranians across the political spectrum in outrage. Hardly a surprise there.
It's a beautiful day in the Gulf of America.
But why stop there? If we're on a renaming spree, let's go all in. Here are what we think are the top 10 things Trump should consider renaming. You ready? 10. Fox News. Let's call it the Lie Network. Truth in advertising. Right. 9. Mar-a-Lago. How about Club Conspiracy? There's a nice ring to it. Think about it. 8. The White House. Maybe reflecting the current incumbent. The Orange House. Reflects the current decor, definitely. 7. Air Force One becomes Trump Fart One because humility is overrated. 6. The Republican Party is now officially going to be called the Trumplican Party. Yeah, we're going to make it official. Trumplican. 5. The Statue of Liberty. Rename it the Statue of Limitations, given the administration's current legal problems with various different judges across America. 4. The Pentagon. We're calling it the Hexagon, just to keep the enemies guessing. 3. Mount Rushmore. We add Trump's face and call it Mount Ego. Sorry, Kanye. No room for you, you're old news. 2. The national debt. We just call it Trump change because it's huge. And at number 1, in the things we're going to rename, the truth. Let's just call it fake news and be done with it. So, to recap, Trump's waging war on maps, geography and common sense, but don't worry, troops. If history has taught us anything, it's that nothing unites a nation like a common clown with a circus. And right now that circus is a man or a clown with a Sharpie and a penchant for rebranding. Like, subscribe, and remember, always question what's truly bizarre. Also known as...
Well, look, I think what the administration and what really DHS is anticipating is that if people are self-deporting, obviously they're going to be put into a biometric system. You said it yourself, border crossings have decreased. But ultimately, it would be my preference that these people just did the right thing and left without us having to pay them. But I think long-term, they're anticipating that that would actually be cheaper than having to pay essentially the overhead costs that it would for them to be basically sheltered before deportation. But I will say this, it's so wild, Eric, because up here, you know, you're hearing all these people, literally Democrats that are being vocally supportive of a MS-13 cartel member who, to be clear, was never a U.S. citizen. And then they're saying that, you know, this individual is deserving of due process, which I would say, you know, the 14th Amendment did not apply to illegals entering the country that were foreign nationals. So, you know, this whole argument and this whole, I think, propaganda spin that they're trying to use. And then you saw CNN just yesterday on Cinco de Mayo saying that, you know, cities across the country were canceling Cinco de Mayo celebrations because of fear of deportation. That whole thing in itself is actually a gross stereotype of what the Hispanic American community is, which is not predominantly illegal. So I've been a huge advocate as a granddaughter of immigrants and then also as someone who is half Mexican, to basically put out there and say, look, you are not xenophobic and racist for wanting border security and safe communities. In fact, many Hispanic Americans have come here the right way. We're doctors, we're lawyers, we're business owners, we're politicians. We're not these illegals that the Dems tried to box us into. And it's that type of ideology, and I would say race baiting, that they're trying to engage in, and it's not working, which is why you saw Hispanic young men specifically vote overwhelmingly for President Trump in this past election.
Do you being from your heritage, Mexico,
Yeah.
Are Mexican people, are they upset with Trump for renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America?
No, in fact, I think a lot of people in America, which first and foremost, we might be ethnically and, you know, heritage-wise from other places, but we're first and foremost Americans. I think that that's probably the best thing that we could have done. You know, you see the very woke, left-leaning, leftist ideology perspective of their president in Mexico. But also, this is the same woman who got elected in a bloody election season, and I'll let people use their own noggins to assume what they will on that. But remember, Mexico's politics isn't exactly clean. And so we're seeing play out here in the United States. I mean, just look how many judges were arrested over the last couple of weeks for being corrupt. So you think that that doesn't exist in foreign countries run by cartels?
So Trump said in the last couple of days or so that he feels he offered help. He offered Sheinbaum, Mexican President Sheinbaum, helped with the cartels, and she turned it down. And Trump says because she's so afraid of the cartels. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would say, yeah, that's accurate. In fact, the last couple of years have been some of the bloodiest ever reported. You'll see actually in a lot of these tourist destinations, young people, specifically if you have kids, don't pay for your college kids to go down to Mexico to party for spring break. Okay, that's probably the worst thing that you can do. A little bit outside of some of these towns, you're actually even seeing murders in some of these resort destinations. But Mexico, for the most part, is exactly what you would expect in a second world country. They are definitely still tied and embedded with the cartels. And it's interesting because you have on the complete polar opposite, President Bukele, who we will be meeting with actually in a couple of days. We are going down there. This is not taxpayer funded. I'm going down as the chairwoman of the El Salvador caucus to help shore up foreign relations. Remember, China is still very active in South America. And what's interesting is you have Bukele, who's anti-China, pro-America, has taken El Salvador from one of the deadliest murder capitals of the world to one of the safest in the Western Hemisphere. And I would argue that is the model of what Mexico should even be. So it's really sad because even dating back into the 60s, I remember hearing my dad tell stories about how my grandmother would bring him there for entire summers to see our family. And it was way different than it is now. So I would never set foot in Mexico unless I was on official business. And I would encourage Americans, until they get their cartel situation under control, don't send your kids.
Interesting.
Revolution, it's really fraught with symbolism.
Yes, I've never quite been sure whether he completely understood the meaning and context of that song or whether he did and he embraced it as his message.
So, Scott Jennings, this seems rich with things that you perhaps, knowing where you stand, would have things to say about, because, of course, the President of the United States has always had a specific formal role with the Kennedy Center, right? Yep. It's been, the stage for supporting arts throughout our country, obviously named for John F. Kennedy. There's a massive bust of John F. Kennedy in the atrium of the Kennedy Center. The President Trump, of course, went early in his second term. There's pictures of him standing next to this bust. I'm just curious what you think. In some ways, it seems like the culture wars that Republicans and Trump in particular capitalized on are pretty on display in what Jamie is reporting here.
Yeah, these people are too fragile to show up for work. The Kennedy Center is like America's theater. The president appoints the people who are on the board of the Kennedy Center. We use it for all kinds of big national events, no matter who the president is. And so it's kind of sad to me that these folks are choosing to grind personal political axes instead of going to work at the Kennedy Center. Most people in America don't have the luxury of being able to call in sick from politics, but it sounds like that's what these people did.
So
well, I think.
And so to go down there to strengthen those relationships, and then also just to say thank you. And look, as we look to decouple from China, we've got to look to South America, to Central America, to India for other trading partners and manufacturing capabilities. So I think there's a world of opportunity ahead of us, and that's why we're going to go down and have those conversations.
Well,
how do you see things differently this time versus the first Trump administration?
Well, first of all, this administration is really supercharging the economy like we've never seen in our history, and everyone feels it across Main Street. People are excited, they're confident, they're investing, and I think this economy is spring-loaded. If we can get those tax cuts passed, I see and have heard small businesses say they are ready to invest, to hire, and grow.
All right, let's go ask.
But I'm not voting to add $5 trillion to the deficit or to the debt ceiling. Conservatives have never voted for that, and now conservatives are lining up and falling all over themselves to vote for the largest debt ceiling increase in all of history. So all the discussion over $2 trillion, $1.5 trillion, it's hard to get your mind around that. But the bottom line is when you add it all up, they're raising the debt ceiling $5 trillion, so they aren't going to reform our spending. And this is what's going to be so disappointing to the American public when they find out that all that DOGE was doing, which was so good, and I compliment and support, never got translated in because no one had the wherewithal and the guts to say, let's don't raise the debt ceiling that much. Let's raise it a small amount. I put forward
that we're ripping out DEI. We're not doing climate change
crud anymore, that instead it's a new day. And this is, again, we had the budget come out on Friday, what we call the skinny budget, more details coming later. But being on the Hill the last few days was great, and it was really encouraging. With the Republicans, it was interesting how hateful some of the Democrats were in some of those hearings, but we had some really good dialogue, and it's just such a joy to defend and promote and never stop fighting for this president's vision for our country.
And in the president's first 100 days, which of course was very successful, you worked closely with DOJ. You canceled, 3,000 contracts and grants to try to save billions. You did it by rolling back some of those Biden-era agricultural policies. What were the...
Does trade deficits constitute a national emergency?
The hollowing out of the U.S.
No, just yes or no.
Class,
yes or no. Yes or no.
It's a national emergency, sir.
It does. It does. You're telling me trade deficits equals a national or creates
persistent and prolonged.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And do you know also, sir, that for the last 4 decades, we've had trade deficits in the United States of America, and nobody said it was an emergency? Democratic and Republican presidents? You know what that says to me? That it's not an emergency because it hasn't been for 4 decades. It says to me that we should bring tariffs back to the United States Congress so that we can make that determination as the Constitution has said and not try to go around Congress. That's just unbelievable to me. Let me ask.
The other thing, too, is this reporter behind me was quite snarky the other day when President Trump talked about the girl having 2 dolls. And he said, well, what? President didn't take the question, but he said, what would you tell that girl? And I said, I would tell that young girl that you will have a better life than your parents, that you and your family, thanks to President Trump, can now be confident again that you will have a better life than your parents, which working class Americans had abandoned that idea. Your family will own a home. You will be able to advance. You will have a good education. You will have economic freedom. That's what we are advancing.
Yeah.